Does an ordinary street in the UK hold the key to whether time travel is possible? That's the question we're going to be answering today as I bring you one very curious area of Liverpool and three related very brilliant books. Imagine you're out shopping on a very ordinary Saturday. You head to meet your partner in a city centre bookshop, only to find the shop isn't there anymore and everyone and everything around you looks very different. The people, the cars, the clothes all seem to have been transported back to the 1950s. This is exactly what happened to a retired policeman in Liverpool in 1996. But before we get into that, if you are a fan of curious stories and you love a good book recommendation, then you are in the right place, because that's all we do and I upload every single Sunday. If you enjoyed this video, please click on the like button. It means a huge amount to me and to Lewis. And hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. Now back we go to Liverpool. It's Saturday, July 1996, and Frank, a retired policeman, and his wife Carol have decided to go into Liverpool city centre to do a bit of shopping. When they get to the train station, they part company. Carol is going to Dylan's bookshop, which is on Bold Street, which eventually became a branch of Waterstones, and Frank went to HMV, a record shop a few streets away. And when Frank had finished in HMV, he made his way to Dylan's as planned to meet Carol, except things felt different. Everything was so quiet, there was no hustle and bustle, everything felt a little bit dead. He was walking on a pedestrianised area, but all of a sudden a van flew around the corner, a box van, the kind of van you'd get in the 1950s, and it blew its horn at him. And he stood there a little bit bewildered. And he was even more bewildered when he walked onto Bold Street, because the whole street looked totally different. The shops, the people, the cars, the clothes people were wearing, all looked out of place for the 1990s. The gentlemen were wearing long overcoats and trilbies, the women wearing pillbox hats and gloves. And he stood there and he was really confused, as you would be, can you imagine? And where Dylan's was supposed to be, it wasn't a bookshop. It was in fact a shop called Cripps, which sold ladies' shoes and handbags. The windows were full of shoes and handbags. And he stood there and he thought, I have no idea what's going on. And then he saw this girl walking down the road, and she was dressed in more 1990s clothes, and she had a Miss Selfridge carrier bag with her. And she walked into Cripps, into the shop with the handbags and the shoes. So Frank followed her in there. And when they got inside, it had all changed and it had suddenly become a bookshop. And he spoke to this young woman and he said, this is going to sound a bit ridiculous, but did you experience what I just experienced? And this woman laughed and said, yeah, I thought this was a new shop. I thought it was a new handbag shoe shop. And now it's a bookshop. I don't understand what's going on. So he wasn't alone, Frank, but when he found his wife, Carol, and asked if she'd experienced anything similar, she said no, everything was normal. Now, we wouldn't have known any of this if Frank hadn't rung into a radio phone in Liverpool and explained what had happened to him. And when he did, so many people rang the radio station and said that there used to be a shop where the bookshop is now, called Cripps, which sold ladies' handbags and shoes in the 1950s. And also there was a firm called Kaplan's, the name that he saw on the van that nearly ran him over. That was a well-known firm in Liverpool during that era. So what happened with Frank? Did he make it up? He's a seemingly level-headed, responsible person. Why would he make something like that up? What happened to him? Is it real? Now, that's the very first story of a time slip on Bold Street. And I'm going to bring you a few more because this area of Liverpool seems to be the epicentre of travelling in time. Another story in that area involves a girl called Imogen. Now, Imogen's sister had just had a baby and Imogen wanted to go and buy her some gifts. So she went shopping on Lord Street, which is kind of a stone's throw away from Bold Street and the disappearing bookshop. And Imogen found a new branch of Mothercare on Lord Street. And she was very pleased, so she went in and everything she noticed was really, really cheap. And she thought this was a bit odd, but being as it was a new shop, she thought perhaps they're having special offers on, that kind of thing. So she collected a few things and took them to the till. But the woman on the till was very confused when Imogen gave her her debit card. She just did not know what it was, and she said, we only take cash. And unfortunately Imogen hadn't got any cash on her, so she had to put the things back and go somewhere else. But when she got home, she mentioned this episode to her mum and this branch of Mothercare, and her mum said, no, that branch of Mothercare hasn't been there for donkey's years, before you were even born. It's a bank now. And Imogen was adamant she had been in this branch of Mothercare, so to settle the argument, her mother took her to Lord Street, and yes, indeed, it was a bank. There was no branch of Mothercare. So where did Imogen go? Did she go back in time? Did she have a moment? We all have a moment. Did she hallucinate? What happened? Because she is adamant that she went into that branch of Mothercare and tried to buy some baby clothes. And another story from that area, needless to say, in 2006, a 19-year-old man called Sean, who was shoplifting, was running from a security guard down Hanover Street, which is very close to Bold Street and Lord Street. Now he runs down an alley to try and escape the security guard, and Sean suddenly feels very, very out of breath and a tightness in his chest, so he's forced to stop, and he fully expects the security guard to come bombing around the corner and appear at any second, but he doesn't. So after a few minutes, Sean very tentatively goes back onto Hanover Street, and everything looks different. The cars are old-fashioned, people are dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Where the roadworks were a few minutes before have gone. And then Sean, feeling very, very confused, pulls out his mobile phone and tries to call someone, but it doesn't work. And there's a kiosk opposite selling newspapers. So he goes over and looks at the date on the front pages, and it is the 18th of May, 1967. Sean is completely freaked out and starts to walk away from this strange scenario up the road towards the jewellers, H.M. Samuel. When he gets to H.M. Samuel, he takes out his phone, and miraculously it works, and everything starts to look normal again, back to 2006. But when he looks down the road where he's just come from, everybody is still walking around in 1967. Now, what happened with Sean? Was he under the influence of something other than fresh air? Did he imagine the whole thing? Well, it's very strange because all of the things he described checked out historically as being accurate. And they also managed to track down the security guard who'd been chasing him. And the security guard said that he got into the alley where Sean had gone down to try and kind of evade him, ran into the alley, and Sean was there, but then he disappeared in front of his eyes into thin air. So explain that one. What happened with Sean? And why would he tell this story and draw attention to himself if he was breaking the law? Another couple of stories from the same area of Liverpool. There was a man making his way through the city centre to meet his girlfriend, and he was heading to catch a train from Central Station, which is a stone's throw from Bold Street. You can actually access Bold Street from Central Station. And that's exactly what this guy did. He walked down the ramp to Bold Street, as he always did, and then he noticed something strange. There was a brand new coffee shop that hadn't been there when he walked past earlier on. Everyone in the coffee shop was wearing very, very old-fashioned clothes that looked like they were from the 1900s. Now, the guy's first thought was they're filming something. It's like a movie set. These are actors. And he was quite intrigued, so after he'd walked past, he looked back to kind of have another shufti, and it had gone, disappeared. In another situation, the last Liverpool story I'm going to bring you is about a man who worked on Bold Street, and he was making his way there to meet his wife. Now, he took the usual shortcut across some railway lines. He knew this area really, really well, obviously, because he worked there. He'd made this journey many, many times before. However, when he came out on Bold Street, he was surprised to see a store called Collinson's, which had closed down donkeys years ago. And it seemed to have reopened and was full of hats and shoes, just as it had been before. Plus, a shop called Catchpole's wasn't in its usual location. It had moved across the street. And then he realised all the cars he could see were 10 to 15 years out of date, and all the people were dressed in kind of very old-fashioned clothes. He met his wife, as planned, outside the bank. They went into the bank, it was all normal, and when they came out again, everything was back to the way it usually was. Collinson's was gone, and Catchpole's was back across the street, where it belonged. The man's wife had noticed absolutely nothing on her journey in, but he was adamant that for those few minutes on Bold Street, he had gone back in time. Now, before we look at some theories about time travel and time slips, because there are some theories, I am going to show you 3 absolutely brilliant books, which all involve travelling into the past or into the future, or both. Now, we couldn't have a time travelling video without this brilliant book. The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, best-selling novel, made into a movie. I have no idea how she wrote this because it must have been so complicated. She must have had a wall filled with post-it notes. It's about a librarian called Henry who suffers from a rare genetic condition where his genetic clock periodically resets out of his control, and he suddenly finds himself pulled through time either into his past or into his future. Meanwhile, Claire, the time traveller's wife, is an artist waiting for her great love, Henry, to appear. And in the face of this force that neither of them can control, they attempt to lead normal lives. It's been described as both a love story and a kind of science fiction fantasy story. Incredibly popular, incredibly well loved, and if you haven't read it, definitely worth it. Book number 2 is the incredible Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, one of my writing heroes. This is a story of Ursula Todd, or more accurately, the many stories of Ursula Todd, as we visit different versions of what her life might have been. In the first version, she's strangled at birth by her umbilical cord and is stillborn. In other versions, she dies as a child. Further on, she falls victim to the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. And later on still, she experiences and witnesses the Blitz in London, both as a rescuer and as a victim. And there is a scene where she is a rescuer, which is so shocking. There's a phrase in it which is so shocking, I had to put the book down for a day just to get over it because it was just so brilliant and so utterly devastating. I will leave you to discover that, or you may have discovered it and know what I'm talking about. In another version, she marries a German and experiences the war from Berlin. But finally, Ursula decides, using a kind of sense of deja vu from her other lives, that she must befriend Eva Braun and kill Adolf Hitler. This is just a genius book. It won every prize going, and quite rightly so. It is fantastic. It's an absolute work of genius, and I loved it. And if you haven't read it, then I strongly urge you to do so. And finally, a book which has received a lot of attention. I'm not going to use the word hype because hype is a ridiculous word. Hype just means a lot of people have liked it and have talked about it. And if that is hype, then this book is hyped, but I absolutely adored it, and everyone that spoke about it was right because it is a fantastic novel and reached the Sunday Times #1 spot very easily, and quite rightly so. This is Yesteryear by Claire Burke. And this is a story of Natalie, who is a tradwife influencer, living the Instagram perfect life on her ranch with her very good looking husband and beautifully behaved children. And everyone loves her. She's living this sourdough, Broadway Anglais pinafore life. But then Natalie wakes up one day and she finds she has transported herself back to the 19th century. And she discovers what being a tradwife really entails without all the Instagram gloss. This is a very clever book. It's a satire, but it's also exceptionally powerful. It's got a really, really deep, profound message in there about how we live today, and the many dangers of social media. I cannot recommend it enough. If you haven't read it because you don't read books that people talk about a lot, which is me half the time, very often I will avoid a book that everyone's talking about and read something else entirely and wait for everyone to stop talking about it. If that's you, just don't with this book, just read this book. It is very, very clever. Natalie is wonderful and deeply annoying all at the same time. She is a work of genius, and Claire Burke is an excellent writer. So give this a try if you haven't already. Most reports around Bold Street go back to the 1950s or 60s, with only a handful going back to the 1900s-ish, because I haven't by any means told you about all of them. But there's nothing earlier than the 1900s. So this time slip seems to end around 1900. Now, there are various theories about time slips and why they happen. So let's just have a look at what people say scientifically, perhaps, although that's a very loose word. The first theory is some people explain away time slips by saying it's some kind of weird deja vu. We've all experienced deja vu, and this is just a very complex version of it in some people's eyes. Those people also say that it could be possible that we have our ancestors' memories somehow hardwired into our DNA. So when we see these time slips, they are actually memories of long ago family members. Could that be true? Could it be something that's kind of wired into our brains? Because we don't understand brains very well. So it's quite easy to explain something away by saying, well, it's the brain that we don't understand. But could it be? Could it be something to do with kind of memories handed down in DNA that enable people to see things that they haven't actually witnessed themselves? Another theory about the Liverpool time slips is based around Liverpool's own underground system. There's an underground train system in Liverpool with hundreds of trains going round and round in concentric circles, in a system which has Bold Street kind of at its centre. And some people believe that this high voltage electricity running beneath the city could account for the time travel. Do not ask me how, I am just the messenger. That, you know, electricity, could that be something that triggers a time lapse? Also, about a kilometre below Bold Street is a highly complicated system of geographical fault lines. The power of these fault lines is apparently intensified by electrical currents. So to some people, this is all down to electromagnetic forces. Now, I am not a physicist. I got A-level physics, but that's as far as it goes. So I cannot explain that to you, but electromagnetic forces is one of the theories that people use to explain why there are so many time slips in this area. There have been studies on Bold Street done involving 4 chronometers placed in different places on the street, and they all showed a variation in readings, but only of a very small fraction of a second. So it's not as exciting as it sounds, but if you add all those small fractions of a second up, they will soon mount into something perhaps a little more substantial. So is that proof that Bold Street holds the key to time travel? Of course, the most famous theory about time is Einstein's theory of relativity, which links time and space together. The faster you travel, the more slowly you will experience time. And they've actually proved this. They took 2 clocks telling the exact same time. One clock stayed on Earth and the other clock was put on a fast moving plane that went in the direction that the world rotates. And when the plane came back around and landed again, comparing the 2 clocks, the clock on the plane was slightly behind. So that is food for thought, but as we know, the universe has a speed limit, at least for now. Now, a video about time travel and time slips would not be complete without probably one of the most famous time slip stories of all, and shockingly, it is not from Liverpool. It involves 2 women, Charlotte Ann Mobley and Eleanor Jourdain, the principal and vice principal of St Hugh's College in Oxford. And in the August of 1901, these 2 women decided to go on a European trip. Now, they ended up at Versailles on their journey, and they toured the site, but they found it kind of rather uninspiring, which is shocking to me because I've been to Versailles and I found it incredible. However, they weren't keen. So they chose to walk through the gardens towards the Petit Trianon, excuse my butchering of the name, a neoclassical mansion which is in the grounds of Versailles, which was built around 1760. But unfortunately, Charlotte and Eleanor became lost and they wandered off the path. And they reported, as we mentioned before, that the atmosphere suddenly became very, very quiet and flat and depressive. Even the trees, they said, became flat and lifeless, with no sense of light or shade or shadows. And they carried on walking, and eventually they came across some gardeners who were wearing very old-fashioned clothes, and these gardeners gave them directions to where they wanted to go. And on the journey to the mansion that they wanted to go to, they met some other people in the gardens who were all dressed in very, very old-fashioned costumes. And when afterwards they looked at some paintings of that time, they managed to spot the people that they had seen with their own eyes. And they believed these people to be members of the court of Marie Antoinette. And later they thought that when they found eventually where they were supposed to be going, they believed they caught a glimpse of the Queen herself. She was wearing a summer dress and a white hat and was sketching in the gardens of Versailles. Now they believed that the day that they slipped into was a specific date in 1792, when Marie Antoinette first heard that the revolutionaries had stormed the palace. Do you believe this? What do you think? These women are highly educated women, very smart, very well respected. You know, to be the principal and vice principal of Oxford College as women in those times is quite incredible. And they recounted this story for the rest of their lives, absolutely adamant that they slipped into this particular day in 1792. I mean, could it be that it was a day filled with so much intense emotion and powerful experiences that it somehow imprinted itself onto the landscape, and these two women suddenly found a way, wandering around those gardens, to access it? We will never know, but it is a very famous time slip story, and one people have debated about for years. And finally, I'm going to tell you one last story, one last time slip story, to try and convince you that these things might actually happen. And it's a story from recent times, very well documented, from October 1979. Because October 1979 is a recent time, isn't it? In my mind, at least, 1979 was just recently. And I will not hear any other argument. Anyway, this involves two couples from Dover in England who set off on holiday together, intending to travel through France by car and then on to Spain. Their names were Jeff and Pauline Simpson and Len and Cynthia Gisby. And they boarded a boat, crossed the channel, got to the French coast, rented a car and began driving. Now, about 9:30 that evening on October the 3rd, they began to feel a little bit tired. They'd been travelling for quite a while, and so they were looking for somewhere to stay. And they pulled off the auto route when they saw a very plush-looking motel. Len went inside, and in the lobby he encountered a man dressed in a very strange-looking plum-coloured uniform. The man in the uniform said there was no room at that motel, but there was a small hotel further along the road if they travelled south a little bit. So Len thanked him and they all carried on their way. And on the way to this hotel, everyone in the car was struck by the kind of oddness of the cobbled narrow roads and the buildings that they passed. They saw on their way posters advertising a circus, which they talked about and noted, and that's relevant later on. But finally they came across this hotel that they've been directed to. Very low building, old-fashioned, 2 stories, and a sign saying hotel outside. And inside, everything was made of very heavy, dark wood. There were no tablecloths on the tables, nor was there any evidence of anything sophisticated like a lift or a telephone. And the rooms were also quite strange when they were shown to their rooms. They were very basic, and the beds just had heavy sheets on them and no pillows. And they all shared a bathroom, and the bathroom plumbing, to quote Len, was very old-fashioned. Nonetheless, they were very comfortable and they slept well, and the sunlight woke them in the morning, streaming through these wooden shutters. There was no glass, just wooden shutters. They went back to the dining room and ate a simple breakfast, which they said was basic but fine. And 2 gendarmes entered the room, and they weren't like any other gendarmes they'd seen in France so far. These men were dressed in very old-fashioned uniforms, very dark blue capes they were wearing, and also hats which were very large and peaked. And I know you are thinking of a low, because I am thinking of a low. However, everything seemed fine, and they went to pay the bill, and Len said the bill was 19 francs, and he was like taken aback, like 19 francs, this is ridiculous. There are 4 of them, they've eaten a meal, they've had breakfast. This is not what they would expect to pay, it's just a pittance. And the guy at the reception said, no, that's fine, that's what it is, 19 francs. They even asked the gendarme if it was okay, and they just smiled and said, yeah, that's fine. So they went on their merry way. Now, on their way back, they decided they quite liked to stay at this hotel again because not only was it, quite interesting, it also was a very good price. So on the way back, from Spain back towards catching the ferry back to England, they decided to try and find this hotel again. And it was poor visibility and it was raining. And they could not find it. They went up and down this road. They knew they were on the right turn because they saw the circus posters that they mentioned before, but they could not find this hotel for love nor money. So they went back to the motel, the place where the guy in the weird coloured plum uniform had directed them. That was there. So they went back there and spoke to somebody on reception who said, no, there's no hotel down here at all. There's just us. And they denied any knowledge of a man in a plum uniform. Now, when they got back to Dover, Jeff and Len had their respective rolls of film developed that they'd taken on their holiday. And both of them had taken pictures of their wives, their respective wives, 2 separate pictures, inside the hotel beside the wooden shutters. But those pictures were missing when the films were developed. There was a full set of film, there were no spoiled negatives, full quota of pictures, but it was as if the pictures had never been taken. Except for one small detail that a reporter discovered when this story became huge, and a reporter looked into it. He said that there was evidence that the camera had tried to wind on in the middle of a film. He called it sprocket holes on the negative, showing the damage of trying to wind it on. I have no idea what a sprocket hole is because I'm not a photographer. But he said it looked as though the film had tried to wind itself on in the middle of the roll where those 2 pictures should have been. Strange but true. Jeff, Len, Pauline and Cynthia are adamant that it happened. But there are skeptics who say that they point out that the destination these 4 were heading to on that day was Avignon, which sounds suspiciously like Avignon. Avignon? Who knows? And on that note, I hope you've enjoyed today's curious true stories and 3 brilliant books which all explore the idea of winding yourself backwards and forwards in time. If you've enjoyed it, please click the like button. And if you've ever experienced a time slip or time travel, comment below because I'd love to hear. Also, if you fancy getting a bus up to go to Bold Street, I'm totally up for that because I'd love to go back to the 1950s and 60s and a much simpler life. Make sure that you click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Next week, as a chronic insomniac, I'll be exploring a topic very close to my heart, which is sleep. And a man who went to sleep in his own bed one night and woke up the next morning hundreds and hundreds of miles away from home. I will see you for that next Sunday, and in the meantime, have a brilliant week.